Calling from an 810 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Garrett from Michigan.
Garrett from Michigan. What's on your mind?
Well, first off, I want to say thank you for everything you guys do over there. When I was in middle school, I started listening to you guys. And then I was kind of in the right-wing pipeline, sadly, and I was a big fan of Dave Rubin's high IQ ideas.
Whoa.
Yeah. And Michael Brooks, though, his videos on Dave Rubin, ironically, helped me sort of get through a rough time in my life. And so I wanted to first thank you guys for all that.
Sweet.
But I have a question for you, but I wanted to ask if I could just preset it real quick.
Sure, of course.
So I've been reading a book, and it's actually the author. You had him on your show maybe, I think it was 10 years ago. His name's Nick Turse, and he wrote the book Kill Anything That Moves, The Real American War in Vietnam.
Yeah, I feel like we've had him on twice, maybe.
Yes.
He's a good writer, yeah.
Yes, and I'm a college student right now. I'm going to Flint. I'm looking to be a teacher. I'm majoring in social studies. And as a college student majoring in social studies right now, Vietnam is sort of, and I guess in my high school, we sort of briefly touched on it. It's not really a huge part, sadly. More of the Cold War era. But anyways, I was reading the book last night. I was listening to the audiobook while at work, and listening to the audiobook, it really just stuck with me. Just sort of learning about the systematic killings of the Vietnamese civilians and just the details of, I guess, just American GIs constantly just throwing grenades into bunkers and villages and homes and stuff like that. And anyways,
setting villages on fire.
Yes, and helicopters shooting rockets at villagers farming the rice paddies. But anyways, reading through the book, it really made me think of the book Night by Eli Weisel, who's a survivor of Birkin Island Auschwitz. And reading through it, I really think that Kill Anything That Moves should be a book that is read in American high schools. I think it does a really good job of showing just the arrogance of the American military at that time, and how the racism and a lot of corporate greed during the war it was a huge turning point in America. And I think the book does just an amazing job of showing that massacres weren't an isolated incident.
Right.
In this case for Vietnam. It was a common occurrence where American GIs, not all of them obviously, but a huge majority of them would go into these villages and just slaughter these people. And I won't even get into Way City, but anyway,
yeah, that
we're
Nick
sort of
Turse
living.
Is the author that I second that recommendation. That it goes into our sort of narrative about My Lai, the My Lai massacre. That it was like a sort of one-off.
A few bad apples.
Yeah, no, it's the one we heard about.
Bob Kerrey, congressman from a senator from Nebraska at one point, and then ended up being like the president of the New School. This is a guy who was like deep into that, and the way that we dealt with sort of like the sort of like slow understanding of just how many of these massacres took place, particularly My Lai, but just the entire philosophy of like you got to destroy the village to save it type of situation. It was super, super creepy, and in fact, George Herbert Walker Bush, I think it was, in his attack on Iraq, the first Kuwait War, I think the idea that he was trying to pitch was that I think it was him, or maybe it was his son, I can't remember, with the specter of Vietnam was over. We had gotten over the sort of reluctance to use force. It was gross. It was gross. I mean, the way that this country sort of like absorbed that information, became aware of it. Really, in many respects, the lessons that we learned from Vietnam were don't allow reporters to report independently from a war zone.
Yeah.
Don't show bodies coming home in coffins.
Yeah.
Don't have conscription, because if you can have an all-volunteer force, it becomes a lot easier for the American public to not be aware of what's going on in these instances. Use more mercenaries. Those were the major lessons, I think, that we learned from Vietnam in many respects.
Yeah. And getting to my question, I'm sorry for taking so long. My main question is, after I read the book and sort of learned more about basically these American-made Vietnamese ghettos, very similar to the ones that the Nazis made for Jews during the Holocaust, I sort of thought of, we're sort of living in a time now where politicians, and this is pretty recent, I mean, we just had an African-American AP class basically get banned from, I believe it was Florida schools, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is I have those classes here in Michigan. I go to Grand Lake High School. We do have a crazy lady on our Board of Education, Amy Facinello. She's interesting. But when I went to Grand Lake High School, I mean, we have an African-American AP class. We have an Asian class. I took a Women in American History class. And so I suppose my question just for you guys is, what steps do you think do we need to take in order to make sure that history teachers in our country are allowed to speak about the harsh realities of America's past without causing just this huge, immense controversy all over the world?
I mean, I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, it really ultimately is make sure that Republicans don't get a hold of your state government. I mean, honestly, I mean, I think you know, in a better world, we would be able to we would change the way that public school is funded. It would be funded by the federal government. We would, in conjunction with states, not based on property taxes, because that becomes a way of just like basically segregating our schools, you know, both socially and economically. And the federal government would have basic standards tied to federal funding that were like, this is, you know, I mean, we've done that before where we put out like, you know, a core curriculum thing that happened during Arnie Duncan's education time. It wasn't, it was, you know, highly encouraged. I'm not sure, like we were forced to assume it, but we could put out like, you need to cover these topics, like the idea of not looking at our involvement in these places is just not an option. The idea of not looking at, you know, sort of the worst elements. I mean, history is history, and we should be looking into these dynamics. And I would also argue that, like, you know, to ignore the African American studies in our history is to really miss some of the core, I mean, if not the core, fundamental drivers of our society, right? Like, I mean, you know, the country was built on slave labor, and so much of our politics have been have involved maintaining an underclass, and it is revelatory, I think, for how that has been done. But appreciate the call.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've had a couple of good calls from young people over the past couple of days. That's encouraging.